Okay. Good morning. So we are in Iggeres Hateshuva. We started Perek Zayin last week. We're holding on the top of page Tzadik Zayin in the standard print of the Tanya, the fourth line, Vehabez. But we're going to start from the beginning of the chapter just to review what we're doing here. The Alter Rebbe explained to us until now, in addition to the classic interpretation and understanding of what Teshuva is, which is the three R's of the recognition and the regret and the resolve to do better. In addition to that, we need to also repair the damage that was done. And he explains, they're based on the writings of Kabbalah and Chassidus, that the damage that's done as a result of a transgression is damage to the Yudke Vovke. That every one of us has a neshama, which is a part of Yudke Vovke, and there's two levels of tshuva tato and tshuva ilah. We haven't even begun to discuss tshuva ilah, the higher level of tshuva. Here he's teaching us tshuva tato. The lower level of tshuva is to return the hay, the second hay of Yudke Vovke, to return it to its place. Because the damage that was done as a result of our transgressions, we've harmed in our neshama the hay, the lower hay. And we have to reinstate and return that hay to its proper place. That's what it's telling us over here. And therefore, in Perek Zayin, he comes and tells us that this tshuva tato, which is to return the hay tato, the lower hay, is done in two stages. And there's two parts to it. So we're going to read through first, we're going to read again Perek Zayin until the fourth line on top of Tzadik Zayin, and then we'll take it slower. Just to remind ourselves what we're up to from last week. Perek Zayin v'ulam, however, derech ha'emes v'ha'yoshor, l'bchinas tshuva tato, the proper and direct way, and straight way, to achieve this tshuva tato, the hey tato, hanal, the above mentioned hey tato, hem beis dvorim b'derech klal. Generally speaking, there's two ways, two levels. Ha'aleph first is to awaken the Eibishter's rachamim, to awaken the compassion al nishmosei v'nafshei elikis upon one's nefesh, shenoflo migra rama chayachayim, which descended, but noflo means more than descended, it fell from this great and mighty city, chayachayim, the source of all life, Baruch Hu, from the Eibishter himself, lebira amikta, to this deep bird, to this deep pit, which are Hene Cholos Atuma v'Sitrachar, the chambers of Tuma and Sitrachar. So, first of all, to recognize and realize the tremendous Rachmanis, the pity, and to take compassion on my neshama. And also to take compassion on Makere b'Makere Chaim, who Shem Havaya Baruch Hu. Also to have Rachmanis, to have compassion on the source from where the neshama came from. Because of, as it says in Pasuk Yoshev Hashem v'Yirachameyu, they shall return to the simple meaning of the pasuk is he shall return to God v'Yirachameyu, and the Eibishter will have rachmanis on him. But here it means v'Yirachameyu, that the person should have rachmanis upon his neshama. Pirush le'er rachamim al hashpo Hashem Havaya Baruch Hu, to be made rachamim, to feel compassion for the hashpo of Hashem Havaya Baruch Hu, shenishtal shelo v'yordo teichei cholos zitrachra. The Eibishter invested a part of him, the Shem Havaya, and he allowed it to be nishtalshel and descend into the hicholos of Sitra Achra, into the chambers of impurity, hatmeim. And how does it happen? Who's schlepping it down into there? Man's deeds, one's evil thoughts. So we have to have compassion on the neshama, we have to compassion also on the level of elikus that is being invested by the Eibishter into that neshama, which is being dragged down into the mud by the person who's sinning. Because as it's written, Melech Osor Berahotim, that he's a king who is chained. Also, he's bound Berahotim with chains, Berehite Mecha, chains in the mind, not just the action that we're doing, but also in the head. This is the idea of Golos Hashchina that we spoke about at length earlier. When is an appropriate time to awaken this rachmanis, this compassion? As it's written in the Siddur, and the Alter Rebbe Siddur, an explanation, Al Maimer explaining Tikkun Chatzos, which will soon. We don't. Tikkun Chatzos is as we said last week, is not a common practice today. The equivalent of that today would be to make a proper cheshbon hanefesh, as it'll soon tell us at the time of Krishma before we go to bed at night. This is also what it's written over there. Nafla teres reishena, that the crown of our head has fallen. Oina lonu, woe is to us, kichatonu, for we have sinned. Because as a result of our sin, the crown of our head, which is the place from where the neshama comes from, is also dragged down. Therefore, in the sefer called Pirkei Cholos, the Eibishter is referred to as Melech Olav, as a humiliated Melech, a humiliated king. Because of Ramak Zal, as the Ramak writes, top of the page now, Ki ein loch iloven godel mizeh. There's no greater humiliation than that of the Eibishter being dragged down as a result of our transgressions. So the Alter is spelling it out to us in very vivid terms that, this is what the situation is. I think that's a little, as we'll soon see, we may think it's just a kleinigkeit, we may think it's something insignificant or not important. But no, every time I transgress, I'm schlepping the Eibusha down with me. And there's no greater humiliation than that. And especially, when the thoughtful person will think deeply, if you think deeply about the greatness of the Eibishter, and you start and you learn and understand the idea of a Malik Kalalmin, and you learn and understand the idea of Seviv Kalalmin, the different ways in which the Eibishter energizes the worlds, Mamala and Seviv, remember that you know from earlier in Tanya, two very different ways, and everyone is capable of understanding that Kol Echad Ve'echad Lefi Shir Sichle, everyone according to the capacity of one's seichel. When you start to think about that properly, you become very bitter. And as we ended off last week, the point isn't to become otsev, to become sad, which is a spiral downwards and only which is a spiral downwards and only disables us from being able to fix things, but rather mirirus, as he says over here, bitterness, which is a motivator to get us to go and do something about it and to fix up and clean up the situation. So that, he says, is the first way or the first step of this tshuva tata, of returning this lower hay. And now we're up to the top of page Tzadik Zayin, the fourth line, and that's where we left off last week. Rabbeis, the second element to be able to have this, as he says over here at the beginning of the Perek, to be able to have this derech ha'emes va'yashar, this true and direct path to be able to have tshuva tata. So the second element for Rabbeis is, the first one was to realize the damage and the harm that I'm doing. The second one is to realize how valueless and void and empty is the klippa and sitra achara that I got myself involved in. The first one is to appreciate the damage that I've caused, and the second is to realize that this is really a nonsense of what I'm getting involved in. So let's read from the fourth line. Rabbeis, the second element is levatish ulachnia haklipa vasitra achara. The second element is levatish, to crush, ulachnia, and to subdue the klippa and the sitra achara. Now, how do we do that? Asher kol chayusa, the entire chayus of the klippa and sitra achara is rak b'pchinas gasus v'hakba. Klippa and sitra achara is really nothing. What gives it life and energy? Gasus, arrogance. Hagba means elevation, self-inflation, right? That it feels, that Klippas and Sitra Achara feels arrogant and big. And when we're able to realize that it's just an empty hot air balloon, then it'll fall. Because as it's written in the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, im takbia kanesher, if you exalt yourself high like a nesher, then the second half of the pasuk says, the Eibusher says, I'll throw you down, like I can't remember the second half of the pasuk. Im takbia kanesher, he'll throw it down. In any case, a nesher is an eagle, which is that flies to the highest, above all of the other birds, is the nesher. And here it's used as a metaphor for klip and sitra achra. But it's an artificial, it's a fake elevation. So what we have to do is to recognize and realize that what seems to be, whatever the transgression, whatever the temptation may be, is to realize that it's just an empty balloon. At best, it's a passing pleasure. At best, it's a temporary enjoyment. But to realize, therefore, because it's only temporary, and therefore it's empty. Then we're able to have a bitush and achno, to crush and to subjugate ad ofar mamash, till the dust, literally. Zui misoso bitulo, this is its death and nullification. In other words, there's no negotiating, there's no compromising, but rather complete eradication. This is to realize that this is totally worthless and useless. If you remember, in Likutei Hamorim, at the beginning over there, he says that there's two, he tells us the Nefesh Elikis, and then he tells us the Nefesh Abamis, and then he says that they both want to take, like two kings, they both want to take control of the body. But it's not that you can make, like used to be, a Berlin Wall, and make an east and a west, and let the Nefesh Elikis have its part of the body, Nefesh Abamis have its part of the body. No. He tells us that each one of them wants full memshala, full domination, full rulership over the whole body. There's no compromising. There's no negotiating. Either the Nefesh Elikis is a control, or Nefesh Abamis is a control. Otherwise, they're at war. So he's saying the only way that we're able, he's telling us over here, is that the only way that we should be able to achieve anything, to achieve this tshuva tata of the hay, is to realize the emptiness, the valuelessness of the klippa and the sitra achra, and that it's a false, artificial arrogance that's blowing it up into something that's really great, but really bitush v'achna ad ofar mamash, till the dust. Zui misoso bitulo, this is its death and its nullification. How do we do that? That's a very ambitious aim. How are we able to do that? So he starts now with a program of telling us how we should be able to temper and to control and ultimately to destroy the powers of klippa and sitra achra in our lives. How's the program? So to start with, alidei, general terms, alidei leiv nishber v'nitcha, a broken and contrite heart. V'liyetz nivza be'enov nimos, a sense of personal, it translates here as a sense of personal unworthiness, repugnance, and so forth. Not that we should look at ourselves in these as we said earlier. It's not talking about us. We're talking about the Nefesh Abamis. I think we did that in Perek Lamed Aleph. It's not to look at ourselves in a negative light. It's not very healthy. But rather to look at ourselves as we are dominated or ruled by the Nefesh Abamis. And if my Nefesh Abamis is my dominant force and motivator, then I have to look at myself from the Nefesh Abamis as nivze be'enov nimos, with a sense of personal unworthiness and repugnance. Perek Chav Tes it was, not Perek Lamed Aleph, right? The Nefesh Abamis, even in a Beinoni, is very arrogant and very proud. Certainly, the Nefesh Abamis that's in a person who's actually considered sinning. So that needs to be humbled, and that was the long therapy that he gave us in Perek Chav Tes of what to say to the Nefesh Abamis and how to deal with the Nefesh Abamis, to lower him and throw him to the ground and fight with him. As is written in the Holy Zohar, the Pasuk in Tehillim says, Zivchei Lekim Ruach Nishbar. David HaMelech says, what are the Zivchei Lekim? What are the offerings, Zevach, the Karbonis, the animals that are brought on the Mizbeach? So he says, what is the ultimate and best Zivchei Lekim? So the Melech says it's not the animals. It's not the animal that achieves anything, but rather it's the Ruach Nishbara, it's the broken spirit. Leiv Nishba V'nitcha. It's the broken heart. The person who had to bring a physical animal, it wasn't that you bring the animal and then you find you're all good and does it for you. That's not what it's all about. But rather, it's the sentiment that the person who offered the carbon, what did that person feel within him or herself when they brought that carbon? So David Melech says it's not the zevach that achieves anything. You know what's it's not the carbon. You know what's the real zevach elikim? The ruach nishbara, it's the broken spirit. The feelings of contriteness and unworthiness and repugnance even that I've allowed myself to follow the path of the nefesh habamis. That is the way to achieve this. Any animal carbon is offered l'shem havaya, which is midas harachmin. The whole carbon scene is appealing to the shem yud kei vav kei of Hashem, which is the shem, the midas harachmin, the attribute of mercy. That's why anytime the verse, the pasuk tells us, speaking about karbonos to Hashem, it uses the term yud kei vav kei. However, aval l'shem elikim, however, the name elikim, which we know is midas adin, he midas adin. Over there, to elikim, we don't bring karbonos. Ein makrivin carbon behema. There's no carbon behema that's brought, because the whole point of the carbon behema is in order to elicit the Eibishter's rachamim. So that needs to go to Yud Kei Vav Kei. So Ki'im, rather, what's then considered an offering to Elikim? Because the pasuk here by David we just quoted says Zivchei Elikim is Ruach Nishbara. Just checking no one's messaging to get on. The pasuk is saying Zivchei Elikim, but we know that karbonos go to Yud Kei Vav Kei. So what is it Zivchei Elikim? Elikim is Gvura, Yud Kei Vav Kei is Rachamim, and when you bring a carbon, it's you're appealing to the Eibishter's Midas Rachamim. So he says Ki'im, instead what it means is Leshaved, therefore this pasuk is not talking about the regular karbonos. This pasuk is talking about what takes place within the person who's bringing the carbon. The carbon is to Shem Elikim, but the person himself is appealing to the Eibishter's, to the Shem Elikim. Leshaber ulahaver ruach atuma v'sitra achra is the shattering and removing of the ruach of the spirit of tuma and sitra achra. This is zehu ruach nishbara. This is the meaning of a ruach nishbara. In other words, it requires gvura. It requires the severity, not to love ourselves so much that we don't realize or overlook our enslavement to the klippa and the sitra achra. Ruach nishbara is the zevach of Elikim. Veheich nishbara ruach sitra achra. How do we break this personal spirit of sitra achra that's within me, within us? Keshalev nishbar v'nitch v'chul. When the heart is broken and contrite. So the carbon is to the Shem Havaya, but we're asking the Eibishter for compassion and he should give us forgiveness. That's, the Eibishter should forgive us. Our carbon goes to Yud Kei Vav Kei. But when we have to deal with the actual Klippa and Sitra Achara that's within us, that already requires something much more than just love. That requires a much more critical look at ourselves. And that's what we're referring to over as Zivchei Elikim. This is to the Shem Elikim. The Zevach to Elikim is Ruach Nishbara. In simple terms, what he's saying over here is that the human condition is that we love ourselves very, very much. And we're very much in love with ourselves. And it's very easy for us to cover over all of our shortcomings. And what he's telling us here is that we need to have some gvura in order to recognize and realize where we're up to and what we've done, where we're up to, how dominated we are and sunken so low into our klippa and sitra achra. But again, he expects us to remember what we did in Perich Chavtes, not in a way of denigrating ourselves. Ourselves is two parts to us. There's a nefesh elokis and nefesh habamis. The nefesh elokis was supposed to be very proud of who we are. And that should give us, as he says, we should say it's below my dignity to give in to the Nefesh Elokis, to the Nefesh Abamis. It's below my dignity to allow myself to fall into Klippa and Sitra Achara. But there's also a Nefesh Abamis, which is attracted and dragging me down into Klippa and Sitra Achara. And that is where I have to look and realize its repugnancy and its unworthiness. So it's not an exercise in making and depressing ourselves or looking at ourselves as unworthy and valueless. That's not what we're talking about over here. That's clearly not very healthy, right? It's not an exercise in personal lack of worth, self-worth. No, we have a lot of self-worth. That is the arrogance that we're supposed to have, which you mentioned earlier, that is the little bit of arrogance we have to have and say it's below my dignity to behave that way. I have a neshama.
But if you fail, then you feel bad. You feel depressed, no?
Oh, so that's what he said earlier, in Perek Tes. When I failed and I allowed, and my Nefesh Abamis overcame me, the depression has to be that I allowed the Nefesh Abamis to overcome, to win. But next time I'm going to do better. Why? Because I have a Nefesh Elokis. I shouldn't allow this to happen.
But if I failed again?
You can fail 1,000 times. The point is not to give up. If the failure is going to tell you...
Yes.
1 second. If the reaction to the failure is going to be, forget it. No point of trying. That is Klippa and Sitra Achara. That's exactly what the Nefesh Abamis, the Yetzer Hara wants. If the failure is going to motivate you to do better next time, that's the Nefesh Elokis is in control. In other words, we're not fooling ourselves to think that we're perfect, but it's just as much as fooling myself to think that I'm not capable of being perfect. And that I'm a slave to my Nefesh Abamis. That's also fooling myself.
If I keep on failing, what does that mean?
That means that I have to try better next time.
Yeah, but it can make you really down in the dumps.
That part of it, there's two things here you're saying. There's the failing, and then there's the reaction. The failing is because the Yetzer Hara got me to fail. The reaction that I should be negative as a result of that is the next step of the Yetzer Hara. Also got me to become despondent. That's all the Yetzer Hara.
Well, I should be happy that I failed?
No. It has to, mediros, that's what we said earlier. It has to bother me that I failed, so I should try better next time.
Yeah, but it could bother me, but I still failed, yeah?
I'll give you a very simple example without talking about anybody in particular. If I'm on a diet and one day I gave in and I ate, it's terrible. So what am I going to say? Now, some people say, forget it. Might as well just finish the whole. I had a little bit of ice cream. Might as well eat the whole tub of ice cream. I had one rogel. I might as well finish the whole tub of rogelach. I failed anyway. Or you say, no, that was that. Tomorrow, or even today, I'm going to carry on and do even better. When I fail, I fail. Okay, no, I'll have to run an extra more time around the block when I do my exercise.
Yeah, but taking your very same muscle, but if it happened once, okay, twice, but if it happened 25 times, you're going to get, very despondent about your diet.
That's true. But if I'm not going to continue my diet, then I've lost. If I gave up, then I've lost. If I keep fighting, I haven't lost.
But you're not going to, each time you fail, it pulls you more down. Now it doesn't pick you more up, even though you can, in theory, overcome.
There's an expression that says stopping to smoke is very easy. I've done it many times.
Exactly.
It means that he needs a better program. Okay, so that works. So that's as far as smoking and diets are concerned. Here we're saying slightly different. Just as I have a Nefesh Abamis, which is dragging me down and has its moments of victory, I also have a Nefesh Elokis, which is dragging me up and it has its moments of victory. And again, this is what with the Alter Rebbe here, it expects us to know from earlier. If we look at our lives, the majority is the victories of the Nefesh Elokis, not of the victories of the Nefesh Abamis. So, but we have both. We're not tzaddikim. We're hopefully now striving to become Beinunim. So we have to be aware that this sentiment, which you're arguing, exactly that argument is also the Nefesh Abamis. 25 times, 100 times, it's irrelevant. That is all arguments of the Nefesh Abamis. I got to fight that too. There's the arguments of the Nefesh Habamis, which goes through my midas and what gets me to feel and want to do something. And then there's the intellectual arguments of the Nefesh Habamis. Says, why bother even to fight it? This is the way you are. You failed already 25 times. So that's still Nefesh Habamis, but it's the intellectual side of the Nefesh Habamis. It hasn't changed. The numbers doesn't change anything. Whether it was once, whether it was 1,000 times, doesn't change.
Remy, can I just say something?
Try. It doesn't mean that you're not going to try, but it doesn't mean that you're not despondent, that you keep on failing.
Remy, can I say something?
Simple. Despondency is Nefesh Habamis.
Remy,
yeah.
Can I say something? The Eibishter made us like that. He made us, and he sent us down here to battle exactly and to do exactly this. And when we're fighting and we're doing, he's getting tremendous nachas from us. And that is what we're here for.
That's true.
Just keep trying and keep climbing, because he made us like this.
That's true.
Exactly. He chose to make us like this. And this, we should feel very privileged to have the opportunity.
It's not
to do
something that, it's also something that we have to fight. So yes, you're right. We do feel despondent. That's part of the plan. It's part of the nachas. Exactly. But we shouldn't let the despondency make us despondent. Don't let the despondency get to you. That's the point.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
So therefore, there is the korban, which is the Shem Havaya, but then there is the Leiv Nishber V'Nitcha. That's already Zivchei Elikim. That already deals with the Shem Elikim. That's already the Gvura, which is necessary in order to break the power of Klippa and Sitra Achra in my life. We're not talking here necessarily about the big international Klippa and Sitra Achra that they wish to put in the world. We're talking about the Klippa and Sitra Achra that's dominating or trying to dominate my life. So I have to, step one, he says, is to recognize its emptiness, its voidness, right? That it's gasus v'hagbos, he says right there at the top, right? It's all artificial, fake arrogance, like a hot air balloon that rises upwards. So now, how am I going to have that? How am I able to break the heart? Right in the middle of the page. So how do we do that? How do we break and humble the heart? It's not enough, in other words, to think about it or even to contemplate it. How do we get it from the brain to the actual heart that it should feel broken and humbled? So he gives us here a different stage process. A small part of it is through sigufim and tinius. A small part of it is accomplished through sigufim, mortifications, and fasts, tinius. But don't worry. But in these generations, that's why he says it's ma'at. Today, in our generations, we can't do that. We don't have the strength to be able to mortification, the suffering which they used to do in the olden days, or to fast like David HaMelech. So therefore, this part of the program is there. It's a real part, but it's a very ma'at mizeir. It's a minor part of the program of achieving a broken and humbled heart. It is part of it, but it's a very, very small part of it. David HaMelech spent his life fasting and doing tshuva for the one sin that's recorded that David HaMelech did. And there's a whole perek of Tehillim, perek Nun Aleph, which we say in Krishma at night, which we're going to quote from soon. And David HaMelech was able to fast. He was a different nature, he was a different person, and to the point where he was able to destroy his Nefesh Habamis completely. He was able to completely eradicate and destroy his Klippa and Sitra Achra. Today, the Alter Rebbe says, as we know, and we learned it earlier, today that's not part of it. We learned it in Perek Lamed Aleph, we learned it over here in the beginning of Iggeres Hateshuva. Today, fasting is not encouraged. The Baal Shem Tov told us, we're no longer able to. It only weaken us. It will weaken us from our davening, weaken us from our learning, and most importantly, it will weaken us from our ability to be able to stand up against the Nefesh Habamis and the Yetzer Hara. But it is a part of the program in a very minor way, though. As our sages comment, as Chazal say on the pasuk, "V'libi chalol b'kirbi," David Melech says that my heart is void within me. What does that mean? What became void? Shahorge betainis. The Gemara says that it's talking about Libi. It's talking about the nefesh. We know that the nefesh lekis, the seat of the nefesh lekis, is in the mayach, in the brain. Where's the seat of the nefesh habamis? In the heart. And here David Melech says, "Libi chalul bekibi," my heart is void, bekirbi, within me. So the Gemara says, "Shahorge betainis," because he has killed it. He had killed it. He destroyed. He eradicated his nefesh habamis through fasting. Okay, that's good for David HaMelech. But what about us? The fasting, we said, is a minor part. It's just a minor part. So where's the Ikar Achnoas Alev? The main Achnoas Alev, the main humbling of the heart, is, as we just said, Liya is Nishbar v'nitcha. Is that a heart be broken and crushed? And again, to remind you, we say broken. What is the broken heart from? From the Klippa and Sitra Achara, that by design, as someone said, by design, they made it that way. But that should bother me to the point of a broken heart, that I'm still having to deal and contend with the Nefesh Habamis, with the Klippa and Sitra Achara. That's the Ikar Achnos Alev. That's the main humbling of the heart. And so, to be able to remove this spirit, this Ruach of Tumah and Sitra Achara, that's how it's going to be able to be removed. So how do we do that? So we have to, first of all, feel a brokenness of heart that I'm involved, that I have Klippa and Sitra Achara. So this is achieved. Memori de Chushbana. Memori de Chushbana means masters of accounting. Cheshbon. With all of the Be'emek Hadas, with the depth of my mind. In other words, that we have to take control of ourselves, take control of our lives, and have a calculation and a proper accounting, not just when it comes Elul, but to always be aware of what I'm doing and be in control, and seeing how good am I, how bad am I, right? There's an expression in Hayem Yem, just as a person has to know one's own chisreinis, one's own deficiencies, one has to also know one's own milas. We have to be aware of what we are capable of doing, what we are doing, and at the same time, we have to have a healthy awareness of our shortcomings, and not, as we keep repeating, not to let those shortcomings pull us down, but to be aware of them so that I can deal with them to pick myself up. That is the extent of the brokenheartedness that we should have, to be aware of these shortcomings. Not just a casual, fleeting cheshbon, but no, emek hadas for oneself, to have a proper understanding, a proper accounting of oneself. What's the expression? A root and branch. Is that the expression? A root and branch checkup, right? Businesses have it every so often where they need to go back and see where things might be going wrong. So they got to bring in somebody who's going to tell it to them as it is and have a look which way the business is going and what needs to be fixed. And sometimes they got to cut corners and sometimes they got to do this and that. This is Morid Chushbana. And when a person has a Morid Chushbana, we will then realize, perhaps, we might then realize how much we have become enslaved to the Klippa and Sitra Achara that's within us. This personal stock taking. How is this done? Again, lahaimik means to think deeply, to delve one's das, one's mind, ubinosei, one's das and one's bina, one's intellect and one's understanding. Shoah achas b'chol yom. For an hour a day. Shoah achas means an hour, or it means for a certain amount of time, a period every day. The Rebbe writes that it could be said to mean as an actual hour, or it could be meant to spend a period of time. But what it means is that there should be time every day where one stops, and not in a fleeting moment, but one stops and properly thinks through, where am I up to? What have I done today? B'chol yom, every day, or laila, or every night, lifnei tikkun chatzos, before the tikkun chatzos, which I said earlier, today that would be the equivalent of before Krishma at night. But what should one do then? To contemplate. To contemplate, what have I done today? And if I've sinned today, what has been achieved? What did my sins cause? B'chinas golus hashchina. My sins caused the golus of the Shechina. What is golus of the Shechina? Canal, which we mentioned earlier. Golus hashchina. We said that in the first part of this chapter. The damage that was caused by me just doing what the Nefesh Habamis wants. Or worse, the damage that's caused by doing what the Yetzer Hara wants. Right? The two very different things. The Yetzer Hara, outright evil, that which is forbidden, and the Nefesh Habamis is just the stuff that the Nefesh Habamis wants and likes. It may not be forbidden, but it still drags down the likus of my neshama into klipa. So there has to be a time every day where a person contemplates on where am I up to, and that will achieve this healthy brokenheartedness. Again, the healthy brokenheartedness is a brokenheartedness that motivates me to do better, not a brokenheartedness that pulls me down into the darkness of sadness and depression and despondency. This is the famous story that there was Zusha Anipola, a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe. Zusha Anipola was, the Alter Rebbe sent two people. He sent to two people before he published the Tanya. He sent it to two people for their haskama, for their permission. One of them was Zusha Anipola. He had a more famous brother by other Chassidim. There's a famous brother. His name is Rabbi Melech of Lezhensk. But he had a brother, Zusha Anipola. He's the famous in Chabad. He's the famous one. By the rest of the Chassidish world, it's Rabbi Melech of Lezhensk. And the Zusha Anipola, at night, he'd sit down to say Krishma, and he would make a cheshbon of the day that went by. And the Zusha Anipola would then, he would tug his casket, his cap that he wore on his head, he would schlep it down, and he'd say, morgen wird sein Gor anders. Tomorrow is going to be much better. It's going to be much different. Tomorrow is going to be a much better day. This is Zusha Anipola, who gave his permission for the Tanya. But even him, tomorrow is going to be different. And that was a standard. He didn't say it because as a routine. He sat and made a cheshbon of today. There's always room for improvement. There's always room to do better. And that's what he's telling us over here. There's the Nefesh Habamis and there's the Yetzer Hara. And both of them drag us down into the klip and sitra achra, and therefore we need to have this feeling of humility of the heart in order to be able to overcome it, and that tomorrow should be much better. So he says, what do we have to do? Let's read that again. To contemplate every day with one's das and bina, with one's understanding. Every day or every night before taking chatzos, to contemplate to contemplate and realize what has he achieved or what have I caused to happen as a result of my chatoim. This level of golus hashchina that we mentioned earlier. And he caused laker nishmasoi v'nefesh elokis, laker to uproot his neshama and his nefesh elokis from where? To detach his nefesh elokis mechaya chayim baruch hu. As a result of giving in to nefesh habamis and Yetzer Hara, I've separated. I've caused the detachment of my nefesh elokis from chayei chayim, from the source of all life. And not just I detached it, I then took my neshama, and Herida, he denigrated it. He brought it down. Lemokim hatuma v'hamoves, to a place of tuma, of impurity, and moves of death. What is a place of tuma and death? Hein hecholas ha-sitra achra. Those are what we referred to earlier, the chambers of sitra achra. V'nasis b'bchinas merkova aleim. And not just did I detach it, and not just did I denigrate it, I have now taken my neshama and became a merkova, became a vehicle for them, for the hecholas, the chambers of sitra achra. Become a slave to that. Not just I gave in to temptation once. I gave in again and again, and now I become a slave to that. I became a merkava, means a slave. Addicted, if we want to use the modern terminology. Just a Merkava, right? The Mashal Merkava that Alter Rebbe gave earlier, just as the Merkava is an example, he used the Oves were a Merkava to the Eibishter, total bittul. The Merkava is also used as an analogy in Klippa, that we become totally subjugated to that which is the Hechalos of Sitra Achra, becomes subservient to these impure chambers of Sitra Achra. Lekabel mehem shefa v'chayus lashpia legufay, to receive from them the flow, the suckle of energy is no longer from the Eibishter, but the suckling and getting the flow of energy comes from the Klippa and the Sitra Achra. Lashpia legufay, to give energy to the body. His body is no longer getting energy from the Eibishter, he's getting energy from the Klippa and the Sitra Achra. It isn't very pleasant reading. But this is what we have to realize, that this is what happens. This is the reality of a life of Klippa and Sitra Achra, a life of Nefesh Habamis, and certainly a life of Yetzer Hara. It's not very pleasant. So the Alter Rebbe is spelling it out for us over here, and he expects us to be able to think about it deeply, contemplate on it. Then it'll only get worse. That's what's meant to stop us. So we detach the neshama from the Chaya Chaim, from the source of all life. We denigrate it, we bring it down, we schlep it down into the chambers of Klippa and Sitra Achra. And then I become a Merkava to them. I become subservient to them. And then ultimately, I'm now getting my energy, my chayas, for my guf is no longer from the Eibishter direct from Kedusha. My chayas is from Klippa and Sitra Achra. So when we contemplate this idea, this will bring a person to a leiv nishma v'nitra, to a broken and contrite heart. I don't know if you ever learned the Maimer of Bossi Lagani, not Bossi Lagani, if you ever learned the Maimer of Anila Deidi, the original Maimer of Anila Deidi of the Alter Rebbe and Likutei Torah. So we're all familiar with Anila Deidi and the mashal of the king in the field, and it's all very nice. King comes to the field and he's greeting everybody. It's all smiles and good. But the whole point, he says, there is that the king comes, and that's Ma'eder, that awakens the Yud Gimel, it awakens in our heart. It's the Eibishter's Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, the Eibishter's 13 attributes of mercy, and that awakens up a corresponding love of us to the king. That's the purpose of the mashal. But if you learn the continuation of the Maimer over there, the Alter Rebbe carries on. He says, what happens if that doesn't work? So if that doesn't work, he says, then we got to, then the person has to contemplate on similar ideas, similar words as what he's telling us over here, to contemplate and realize the separation from the Eibishter that was caused as a result, what is caused as a result of my separation. And all of this terrible stuff. And then Alter Rebbe says, no, what happens if that also doesn't bother the person? I became aware of it, and I realize I've detached, and I've sunk in, and I've gone low, and I'm getting my chayah. It still doesn't bother him. So over there, that Maimer, when the Likutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe goes in and explains over there. Then he says you need fasting and fire, and he gives an example of a rose that's red, and when it goes into the fire, it turns white. So over there, the Alter Rebbe, again, this is over here. He says it's not for today, but he says someone who's reached such a state where it doesn't even bother him anymore. He's aware, he's gone through this process of thinking deeply and contemplating. Still doesn't bother him. That person needs to have much harsher treatment. And over there, he speaks about fasting and so on, and the mortifications. Over there, he goes in a bit more length of that. But meanwhile, over here, he hasn't said, that's not what we're talking about. So far, this meditation that he's telling us over here should be enough to motivate a person to want to do things better. Because nobody wants to be sunk deep and get all of their chayas from Klippa and Sitra Achra and be totally separated from the Eibishter. Nobody wants to be separated from the Eibishter. I mean, just to digress, I mean, this idea that no one wants to be separated from the Eibishter was a famous word of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Yid niter will and niter ken, and a Jew doesn't want and is not able to become separated from God. We see this most. You see it with the Jew who turns up once a year in Yom Kippur. We see it in all sorts of things. The Jew doesn't want to be separated from the Eibishter, just doesn't realize that he's being separated. This is what the Frierdiker Rebbe speaks about in the Maimer of Bossi Lagani. That if a Yid were to know what happens as a result of transgressing the Eibishter's will, he would never do it. Then why does he? Because we convince ourselves, we trick ourselves thinking that we're still connected. But really, a Jew will never want to be separated from the Eibishter. Zeo Shomer Razal, and this is what our sages tell us. It's 2 lines from the bottom. Zeo Shomer Razal, Rishoim B'chayim Kruyim Mesim. The Gemara there says that tzaddikim, even if they finish their physical life in this world, they're still alive. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't die, Yaakov Avinu didn't die, they're still alive. The Rishoim, the wicked ones, even when they're physically alive, they're considered dead already. They're not considered alive. Rishoim b'chayim kruyim mesim. During their lifetime, even, they're called dead. Why are they called dead? The heart is beating. The blood is running through their veins and their lungs are blowing. So they're breathing. Why are they considered dead? So he says, what it means is, kalema, this means to say, shechayim nimshachim mimokim hamoves v'hatuma. That their chayas, their chayim, their life, is coming from a place of death and tumah. Which is what we just said. If one detached oneself from the Eibishter and detached one's neshama from the Chaya Chaim and denigrated and schlepped it all the way down, and it became a merkava to klip and sitracha, then one's energy and life comes from sitracha. Sitracha is considered moves. So such a person, which we're referring to here as a rasha, such a person, even if they're physically alive, they're considered dead because their source of energy comes from moves, from death. And here in the parentheses, he says another example from a pasuk in Hallel. In Mashakos, top of the page, pasuk says, that the dead are not able to praise. So the Alter Rebbe asks a question, a simple question: what does this pasuk mean? What's David Melech saying over here? Are we mocking the dead? That we who are alive are still able to praise the Eibishter, but the dead are no longer able to praise him. You know, we have a din that says that when one goes to a cemetery, the men are supposed to hide their tzitzis. Normally the tzitzis are showing, but in the cemetery the tzitzis have to be hidden. They don't know if you probably never knew that for obvious reasons, right? Why is that? The reason is it's called, as a mitzvah in Torah says, to le'eg larosh. That is, we don't want to tease the dead that we have a mitzvah. They don't have mitzvahs anymore. So the mitzvah, that's why in the cemetery now they wear tefillin, but tzitzis people wear. So if you go to a levaya, God forbid, at 2:00 in the afternoon, so we don't want to show the dead that we have tzitzis. It's called considered teasing them. They don't have the opportunity to do mitzvahs anymore. It's called le'eg larosh. So the Alter Rebbe asks over here, what does it mean over here? What does David HaMelech mean when he says in Tehillim, in Hallel, Le'ah Mesim Yahalaluka, that the dead are not able to praise the Eibishter? Is this not considered Le'eg Larosh, mocking Rosh, the impoverished? Someone who doesn't have something, we're not allowed to mock them. So the Alter Rebbe says, also the pasuk says that the dead are not able to praise. This is not considered loig larosh, mocking the impoverished, chas v'shalom, because he's not talking here about those who are physically dead. Rather, Ela Kavana, he says the Kavana of this pasuk in David HaMelech in this pasuk in Tehillim is Ela Kavana al Harishoim. It's talking about the dead. We're talking about the Rishoim that we just said. The Rishoim are considered dead even during their lifetime because Shebechayim Kruyim Mesim, because during their lifetime they're also considered dead. And being that they are spiritually dead, they're unable to praise the Eibishter. Because because they are confused with machshavas zaros, with all of these foreign alien thoughts, while they are yet in their wickedness, and therefore they're not even interested in tshuva, keneda, as is known. So when a person is in such a state where he's become totally a merkava to sitracha, so he's not even going to be able to praise the Eibishter. Once one gets into that cycle, it's very, very difficult to break free from the cycle. Not impossible, but it's very difficult to break free. So you're asking before about becoming despondent. It's not impossible to break free. Of course it's possible. It's just more difficult. Like the person who, after indulgence for a long time, and they want to restart the diet. Obviously, it's much more difficult. or the person who was smoking for a long time, it's much more difficult to stop the smoking, etc., with all of the other addictions that we may have. The same thing is when we become addicted or enslaved, the merkava, to the nefesh habamis. It's possible, but it gets more and more difficult. But there's never to say chas v'shalom, there's no hope. So the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is stop it before it happens. Realize what can happen. So realize the golos, realize and have a genuine brokenness and contriteness of the heart, so that you should be able to drag yourself out of it. Okay. Any questions? Okay. We'll leave it till next week.